Shehan Jeyarajah joins us now on 365 Sports. So what would you do when you look at wins against top 25 teams when they were ranked when you played them compared to where they are now? How would you iron all that out with a vote?
Well, I think for me, the way that I view a team with more data is more relevant to me. Because, for example, I mean, you look earlier in the year, Tennessee played a team like Oklahoma that was top 15 in the country. Since then, they've pretty well proven that they're not a top 15 team in the country. Now, I do think that you can take into account a little bit, hey, this is how a team was playing, here's how a team was positioned back a couple weeks ago, but I certainly look at where they have ended up. The more data that we get, we learn more about these teams. And especially, again, when you look at some of these teams that were rated really highly in the preseason and how maybe they've communicated. Like, for example, I'm not going to give Boston College credit for beating a really good top 25 Florida State team if I know that team is no longer top 25. So I think that you have to keep it moving. And I actually credit the committee a lot for doing that and kind of keeping it moving and really reevaluating every single week.
Yeah, well, they were number 9 when you beat them. Depends on, when that was. Week 1, and they've lost 9 games. Well, they were never really number 9, right? I mean, that's not how it works. We mentioned at the end of the show yesterday, but you had a very interesting tweet of every program that is the Owls has fired their coach. And among them, the most recent one is Tom Herman. And he's kind of had a meteoric drop from Texas to now getting fired at FAU. What do you think the realistic future is for him in college football, if there is one?
It's such a great question. And I know, you look back a couple years ago, especially after he was fired at Texas, he spent some time in the NFL. He was actually like a special projects consultant with the Chicago Bears. I wouldn't be shocked if he does a football-only type job and decides to go to the NFL level. I mean, the reality is people kind of viewed him as a coach who, when you look at him as a coordinator, and the word is he is potentially looking for coordinator jobs as well. But, you kind of see his rise up. He goes through Houston, is really successful there, goes to Texas, pretty successful there. Obviously doesn't get the job done, but I think does a very good job, gets him back to 10 wins for the first time in a little while. And for this flame out to happen at FAU, and for it to happen this quickly as well, is pretty unbelievable. I mean, this was a program that certainly hadn't lived up to expectations the past couple of years, but it's one that's won 10 games in recent memory. And Tom Herman just was completely unable to do that. So I think that in the short term, you're going to see him as a candidate for major offensive coordinator positions. I mean, a funny one would be if he did end up at Oklahoma, taking over as the offensive coordinator over there and playing Texas next year in the Cotton Bowl. But I do also think that it's on the table for him to at least consider opportunities at the next level as well.
Shehan, since he brought up the coaching carousel, it's kind of quiet right now. I mean, I know there's been a couple of jobs, and as far as the major jobs going, it looks like it could sort of remain that way, barring any sort of surprises. One job that was thought to be potentially out there is the Baylor job, your alma mater, Dave Aranda. He's coming back. I was just curious your thoughts on that. And just, are we in for a pretty quiet coaching carousel when all is said and done, you think, over the next few weeks?
Well, I think that it's very realistic that we don't have a single Power 4 coach fired. That's the direction that we're trending right now. The closest that I kind of see right now is Purdue's going to get really interesting. They've been miserable in 2 years under Ryan Walters. I think Neil Brown is safe, but there's going to be some heat on that end as well. There are a couple jobs that could open because of retirement. Mac Brown at North Carolina is always going to be a factor there. I think Sam Pittman at Arkansas has been rumored a little bit, but he pushed back when he was asked pretty recently. But, to talk about Baylor for a second, like their job in the preseason was get to 6 wins, get to the postseason, get to a bowl game. And after they fell to 2-4, I really thought it was going to be very difficult for them to do that. Well, they've rattled off 4 straight wins, of course, technically still alive in the Big 12 race. They're definitely jockeying for better bowl position. And I think that you have to give them a lot of credit for what they've done over the past couple of weeks. Jake Spavital, I think, has really elevated this offense in a big way. And you're starting to see development from players like Bryson Washington at running back, like Sawyer Robertson, who outside of Shedeur Sanders is maybe the best quarterback in the Big 12 right now. So it's not just the fact that they've gotten to 6 wins. I said to people before the year, I felt like they had to develop some playmakers who would be able to also come back in 2025 and make people excited. Sawyer Robertson is going to be one of those. Bryson Washington's going to be one of those. There are some guys, Josh Cameron at receiver, I think is a very exciting player as well. So I think that they're starting to not only find an identity on offense especially, but I think that they're also starting to develop some of these young guys. And when you look not just to 2024, but to 2025 and beyond, it really seems like Dave Aranda has pulled himself out of the tailspin.
Shehan, I tell you what, we see we're now just, a couple of weeks away, 2 or 3 weeks away with the championship games in the conferences, and it's mass chaos. It might just iron itself out, let it all play out. We don't even know who's going to win the Big 12 or play for the game. But in your opinion, is there any way, based on BYU losing last week to Kansas, that they get more than one team in the college football playoff?
No, I don't see any way at this point. And honestly, I think that they're at more risk of dropping out entirely at this point than getting 2 teams in. And the reason that I say that is we'll see the rankings tonight. That's obviously going to be up in the air. But if you look at the AP, BYU fell to 14 or 15. Like, they're way out of the field. Colorado is right on the edge there in the 17 range. Arizona State kind of bringing up the rear in the 20s range. And I expect that that's what it's going to be tonight whenever the college football playoff rankings come out. But I don't think that any second team is going to be able to climb their way up. Now, I have a huge issue with the AP and how far they dropped BYU. I don't understand the logic of dropping them so far behind Miami, but I don't really understand how college football has treated Miami and BYU so differently, really, since they were both undefeated even. But I do think that that right now, the job for the Big 12 is going to be get in front of Boise State, stay in front of Army or Tulane. And again, I think that's even a little bit more up in the air than it was a couple weeks ago.
I want to go back to Neil Brown. Why do you think, in particular, Neil Brown is safe? Because the fans would disagree with you wholeheartedly.
Well, I do think that the way actually, let me take it even a little bit further back. So last year, after their 9-win season, West Virginia decided to give Neil Brown an extension, and it was kind of a compromise extension. It did give him a little bit more money. It increased his buyout for the 2024 season, but it actually lessened his buyout for the 2025 season. So I think the plan has always been at West Virginia, we're going to ride out 2024. Hopefully things don't go wrong, and they've gone a little wrong. But then in 2025, we can make our real decision on him. At this point, I think that it's just going to be a lot for West Virginia to give up on him. And the other piece, too, is I don't necessarily know that there's obvious great coaching candidates out there as well. And, I think that at West Virginia, look, the thing for Neil Brown is that he's never had that true drop-off. But I think that at a certain point, Ren Baker, their athletic director, is going to have to make a tough decision. I don't think it's going to come this year. And the other piece, too, when you talk about a slow carousel for Power 4 coaches, I want people to understand this. A big part of it is the House v. NCAA case. Nobody knows at this point exactly how this is all going to be administered. They don't know the timeline. They don't know exactly how much money they're going to need. People don't want to deal with the instability. And that's why you're not seeing any programs make coaching changes. They want to ride out this 2024 postseason cycle. Next year, maybe they can reset. Maybe we have a crazy busy carousel next year, but nobody wants to be the first one. And the other piece, too, is that nobody knows exactly how a 12-team playoff is going to impact just the timing of the coaching carousel, because you don't know, are assistant coaches or potentially even head coaches not going to be available because they're still coaching in the playoff. I think it's a huge dynamic to keep an eye on, and nobody wants to be the first team to do it.
So when it comes to tonight, we talked about BYU and the Big 12 at large, also where Boise State fits. What are kind of the 2 or 3 biggest things you're looking out for tonight, just big picture CFP?
Well, the conversation over the past couple of days, especially on social media, has been about the SEC's place in the college football playoff. And I think that the most consequential team to be ranked will be Tennessee. Tennessee at this point has a win over Alabama, but then they have 2 losses, one to Arkansas, one by 2 touchdowns to Georgia. I don't think that their case overall is amazing. So it'll be interesting to see. Do we see them in the 10-11 range, which would be firmly in the field? Do we see them more in the 13-14 range where they probably wouldn't be able to rise up from after that? This, I think, is going to be the ranking where we figure out can the SEC get 4 or will it be 5? And I think that similarly, where exactly Indiana lands in this ranking, they've been top 5 before, but if they're able to even continue to trend upwards, that's going to put them in an interesting position as a potential 11-1 team if they were to lose to Ohio State. Look, if Indiana beats Ohio State, not only are they in, they're either the 1 or 2 seed. If they lose, though, as an 11-1 team, I think that their case becomes a little murkier. So it's going to be a lot of jockeying between those 2 leagues and those 2 positions. I think the other thing, too, to keep an eye on is BYU versus Miami and versus SMU and also Boise State. If you see BYU in the more Miami range of the 10, 11, 12, I think that they should feel really good about that. I think that if you have them 2 or 3 spots behind Boise State, 2 or 3 spots behind SMU and potentially Miami, that's, again, a little bit of a warning sign. And the other piece of this as well is going to be how high does Army move up in advance of their game against Notre Dame? Now, I feel like Army probably needs to beat Notre Dame to put the Big 12 at risk of getting left out completely, and I don't anticipate that's going to happen. But you want to make sure that you have a little bit of wiggle room just in case disaster strikes.
I know that this is more of like a sports bar or talk show, so here I am with you, and we are talking with you about if Indiana loses to Ohio State, and I don't care if it's 10 or 17 points, but I understand people could look at a game and a score differently. But if they do that, are they out? And secondly, would they be out if it was another name other than Indiana on their jersey?
It's a great question. It's a really, really good question. I think that from my perspective, you kind of go back and forth on their case, right? Because I want people to understand from an analytic perspective, when you talk about these computer models, Indiana rates really well because they have beaten almost every single one of their opponents by more than 14 points. Now, they haven't played great opponents, but they've destroyed them. And now you head into a game against Ohio State. Look, if they get beat the way that they beat, for example, Nebraska earlier in the year, 56-7, that's going to make the case a little hard. If it's a very competitive game that Ohio State pulls away from, I think they're still going to have a really good case. And, you have to start sitting here and making the comparison to other teams. Because, for example, how do you rate them against a team like Notre Dame, who also hasn't played a very tough schedule, but has the Texas A&M win, but also, by the way, has the Northern Illinois loss? How do you compare them versus a team like Tennessee, which has the Alabama win, but also has an Arkansas loss and doesn't have an especially great schedule outside of that? So I do think that they should be okay. I mean, the precedent, frankly, even if you're the Big Ten, of an 11-1 team getting left out of the field, I think is tough, a little tough to stomach. But I do think that I do feel like they're going to be in the field even if they lose this game, as long as they don't get absolutely destroyed.
Do you have a Heisman vote, Shehan?
I do not. You do
not. Okay, then you can just tell us right now, 2-3 weeks left in the year, what's your ballot?
Yeah, good question. So I think that, to me, it's a 2-man race right now. I think it's between Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty. I lean Travis Hunter right now. The thing that's always going to be interesting with Travis Hunter is I think that it's actually the defensive stuff that really needs to kind of come through. He got a 3rd interception last week. I think that'll help his case quite a bit, just because cornerback's not a position where you really get to rack up many stats. You kind of just look at like PFF coverage grade and kind of just have to use eye test in some ways. And that's a tough thing to do for a vote that obviously is nearly 1,000 people. Offensively, of course, I mean, he is top 15 receiver in college football, top 10 in receptions. He's got, I believe it's 10 total offensive touchdowns at this point. I think that he's been excellent enough at both positions that I do think that he's the front runner right now. And by the way, it doesn't hurt that Colorado has been way better than anybody expected, and he's a huge part of that. Ashton Jeanty would definitely be at worst my number 2. His numbers are just absolutely insane, and he also is potentially maybe leading a college football playoff team. I think in my number 3 spot, I would go Cam Ward at Miami. I think that he, as a quarterback, probably carries more load than any other quarterback in college football right now. And when you look at Miami going from pretty average team in 2023 to playoff contender in 2024, I think that he's been at the center of it. So that would be my top 3 right now: Hunter, Jeanty, and then Cam Ward at number 3.
Would it help? Travis Hunter, of course, we know the what he's done. I brought this up in the last segment. Charles Woodson, Tim Brown, Johnny Rogers, who am I missing? Desmond Howard. They all had returns for touchdowns in some way. And I might be forgetting one or two others. Would that not just seal the deal if he would have had one of those two?
Well, I think that he plays so much more receiver than almost any of those guys did as cornerbacks. So I don't think he needs it. Now, look, if you score touchdowns as an offensive player, obviously you get interceptions as a defensive player, and then you score special teams touchdowns as well. I think that does maybe just ice it. But I think that his volume is big enough with his play as a receiver and his play as a cornerback that he should be okay. I mean, again, when we talk about these two-way guys, and there are multiple guys who have been good offensive players. I mean, Champ Bailey also comes to mind. But like he is like one of the top 10 receivers in the country. He was one of the 11 semifinalists for the Bolitnikov that was just released as well. So to be that level of offensive player and that level of defensive player, I think that he can do without the special teams. But it certainly wouldn't have hurt his case.
Shehan, thank you, man. Paul, anything else? Nope. Craig? All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Love having you on. When we get you on Tuesdays. You too. All right. From CBS Sports, Shehan Jeyarajah with us on 365 Sports.